Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of mathematics. We're continuing our series, and today we are going to be focusing on something very special.
Indeed, the 2025 Abel Prize being awarded to Masaki Kashiwara.
It's a big deal, right? I mean, it's basically the Nobel Prize of math.
For sure, the Abel Prize is a huge recognition in mathematics. It's like the Nobel Prize and signifies incredible achievement in math. Professor Kashiwara has made significant contributions to the field, so it is a truly remarkable and deserved honor.
And the area he's being recognized for is algebraic analysis, which, for those of us who aren't mathematicians, that might sound a bit abstract, maybe even a little intimidating. But from what I've gathered, it's like this incredibly powerful way of thinking, almost a master key to unlock a whole bunch of mathematical problems.
Yeah, it's a very powerful area of math that Professor Kashiwara helped pioneer by essentially merging two different fields.
Yeah.
The abstract structures of algebra with the more, I guess you could say, fluid and continuous world of analysis.
Okay, so we are talking about combining the ideas of change and evolving systems with the fixed structures of algebra. What kinds of problems can this help solve, and why is this so groundbreaking?
Well, you see, traditional analysis is all about change. It's about things like calculus, differential equations, things that evolve over time. Algebra, on the other hand, it deals with like fixed structures, symbols and how you can manipulate them. And what algebraic analysis does is it brings these two, seemingly distinct worlds together. And it gives us new tools to look at problems that were previously very difficult to solve, not only within mathematics itself, but also in how we apply math to the natural world. So in things like physics and engineering.
That's what I find so compelling about this whole topic, and that's exactly what we wanted to explore in this deep dive. We've been looking at a bunch of different sources, news reports, academic perspectives, and our goal today is to really grasp what algebraic analysis is all about and understand why Professor Kashiwara's work is considered so important. So where should we begin? What kind of sparked this whole intellectual journey?
Well, like with many great mathematicians, it's always fascinating to look back at what initially inspired them. And for Professor Kashiwara, it seems like it all started with something pretty traditional. Japanese puzzles called tsurukamazan, those crane and turtle puzzles.
I do remember those from our prep. For our listeners who might not be familiar, could you explain what they are?
Sure. Basically, they're word problems, disguised as these little puzzles that involve solving a system of linear equations. So imagine, for example, you're told that there's a group of cranes and turtles, right? And, the total number of heads they have and the total number of legs.
Okay, I see. And the challenge is to figure out how many cranes and how many turtles there are.
Exactly. And, a crane has one head and two legs, while a turtle has one head and four legs.
Right. So if you had, let's say, a total of 16 legs and 5 heads, how would you solve that?
Well, in that case, you would use a system of two equations with two unknowns. If we let k represent the number of cranes and is the number of turtles, and we're giving y total legs and x total heads, then we have these two equations. 2k plus 4 is equal to y, and k plus s equals x. Now, plugging in the numbers from your example, 16 legs and 5 heads, we get 2k plus 4 is equal to 16, and k plus s equals 5. Solving the system of equations, we find out that there are 2 cranes and 3 turtles.
So it's like a fun little brain teaser, but with a solid mathematical foundation. And I can see how that would spark someone's interest in math. But how do you go from these puzzles to something as advanced as algebraic analysis?
Well, the key here seems to be that Professor Kashiwara wasn't just content with, finding the answer to a specific puzzle. What really fascinated him was figuring out how to generalize the problem. He enjoyed taking a step back, seeing those underlying algebraic structures, and asking himself, what happens if we change the rules? Or if we make it more complex? That kind of thinking, moving beyond the specific to the general, that's often where significant mathematical breakthroughs happen.
It's like seeing the forest for the trees. It's about abstracting those general principles from specific examples. So now let's fast forward to the 1970s. What was happening in math at that time? How did algebraic analysis emerge?
Well, back in the 1970s, analysis and algebra were like two separate branches of math. They had their own tools and their own ways of thinking. Analysis was focused on continuous functions, limits, differential equations, basically describing how things change. Algebra, on the other hand, it dealt with more abstract structures like groups, rings, and fields.
So two important areas of math, but they were kind of siloed, weren't they? Not really interacting much.
Yeah, you could say that. However, some really important things were happening that started bridging this gap. And a key figure in this was Mikio Sato. In the late 1950s, Sato did some truly groundbreaking work on something called hyperfunction theory. It was a major departure from the way people were thinking about functional analysis at the time. Sato cleverly used sheaf theory and complex analysis to define these generalized functions, which we now call hyperfunctions.
Okay, I think we might need to pause here for a second. Sheaf theory might be a new term for some of our listeners. Can you break that down for us?
Okay, so imagine you're trying to study a complicated landscape, like a mountain range. You don't try to grasp the whole thing at once, do you? You might look at smaller patches, individual slopes and valleys. Sheaf theory is like that. It helps us understand global properties of these landscapes by piecing together information from those smaller local patches. It makes sure that everything fits together consistently. In math, this is really powerful for studying how functions behave, especially when they're defined on complicated spaces.
So it's a way to study those local behaviors and how they determine the overall picture.
Exactly. And Sato's big idea was to use this framework, along with complex analysis, to define these new objects, the hyperfunctions, which are like these superpowered functions that can deal with singularities and all sorts of crazy behavior.
So essentially, Sato is building this bridge between analysis and algebra using these more abstract tools from sheaf theory and complex analysis.
That's exactly it. And Professor Kashiwara recognized the significance of this. He saw the potential in this new way of thinking. And so he became a student of Sato and really devoted himself to exploring this emerging field, which we now call algebraic analysis. It's about applying algebraic techniques to those objects that we study in analysis. You could even think of it as a way to geometrize analysis.
Algebraic geometrization of analysis.
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds pretty deep. What does that actually mean in practice? How does it change the way mathematicians approach problems?
So imagine you're trying to study a differential equation, those equations that describe how something changes over time. In traditional analysis, you might try to solve that equation directly, focusing on the individual solution. But with algebraic analysis, the perspective changes. You step back and consider the whole system of differential equations, or even the differential operators themselves, as a single algebraic object. You try to understand the structure of that object, much like you would study a geometric shape by looking at the equations that define it. And by understanding that structure, you gain insight into the behavior of all the solutions, even without explicitly solving the equations.
Okay, that's a really fundamental shift in how we think about the problem. You're not just looking for individual answers, but understanding the underlying structure of the entire system. And I guess this is where Professor Kashiwara's work with D-modules comes in.
Exactly. D-modules are like those algebraic objects that Kashiwara brought to the table. They're specifically modules over a ring of differential operators. And he introduced them as this really powerful tool to study things in analysis, especially those tricky differential equations.
So again, it's about using these algebraic tools to study analytical things.
Right. Think about it. A differential equation describes a relationship between a function and its derivatives. Now, a D-module, it captures that entire relationship in this algebraic form. You're not just looking for solutions anymore, you're studying the equation itself as an object, and that reveals all sorts of hidden information about the solutions, like whether they have singularities, those points where they blow up to infinity, and even how many solutions you can expect to find.
So it's like a more holistic way of understanding differential equations. You get a broader perspective and deeper insights. And how influential was this work?
Hugely influential. In fact, his master's thesis, which he wrote back in 1970, laid the whole foundation for the analytic theory of D-modules. Professor Pierre Shapira, who collaborated with Kashiwara, has said that between 1970 and 1980, Kashiwara essentially solved almost every fundamental question related to D-modules.
Wow, almost all of them in a decade. That's just remarkable. But his thesis was initially written in Japanese, right?
Yeah, it was originally in Japanese and wasn't translated into English until 1995, so it might have taken a while for its full impact to be felt internationally, but it was clearly a groundbreaking piece of work.
Okay, now we have to talk about microlocal analysis and this really famous paper that Professor Kashiwara co-authored. Can you tell us a bit about that?
So microlocal analysis, it's a really cool way to analyze mathematical objects on a space called a manifold. It's like looking at things not just at every point in space, but also in every direction at those points. Imagine looking at a surface, right? Microlocal analysis lets you examine every point on that surface and also all the different directions you could move from that point. Even lets you see how fast something is changing in each direction. In more formal terms, it's about studying objects on the cotangent bundle of the manifold.
Cotangent bundle. I think some of our listeners might need a bit of help visualizing that. Can you break that down a bit?
Sure. Think of it this way. You have a map, and each point on that map represents a location. Now imagine that at each point, you also have a bunch of arrows pointing in all the possible directions you could go from that point. And maybe those arrows also tell you how steep the terrain is in each direction. The cotangent bundle, it combines all that information, the location, the directions, and the rates of change into one big mathematical object. It's like a map with extra dimensions that tell you more about what's happening at each point.
Okay, I think I'm starting to see it. It's a way to get a much more detailed picture, not just where something is, but how it's behaving at that point. So how does that famous paper, the SKK paper, fit into all this?
So the SKK paper, that was authored by Sato, Kawai, and Kashiwara, hence the acronym SKK back in 1973. It was really influential because it formally introduced these things called microfunctions and this crucial concept of the wavefront set. The wavefront set, it basically tells you where a function is misbehaving, where it's becoming singular. But it doesn't just tell you the location, it also tells you which directions are causing trouble.
So it's like a more sophisticated way to pinpoint those problematic spots in a function, taking into account not only the position, but also the directions of change.
Yes, exactly. And what made the SKK paper so important is that it wasn't just about these definitions. Professor Shapiro really emphasized that the key contribution was the functoriality of their constructions. They introduced this thing called the microlocalization functor, which is a systematic way to lift those mathematical objects from the manifold to its cotangent bundle. And by using this functor on different objects, they could derive a whole bunch of new and important concepts, like the microfunctions and microdifferential operators, all within this unified framework.
So it's like a machine that takes one thing and turns it into another, right?
Hmm.
And by changing the input, you get all these different outputs, but they are all related and consistent.
Yes, that's a great way to put it. And depending on how you embed the manifold into a larger space, for example, by embedding a real manifold M into its complexification X, or even embedding it diagonally into the product space X times X, you get different objects. But they're all connected through this microlocalization process.
That sounds really elegant, like a single principle that gives rise to all these interconnected concepts. And this paper also had some really important results, didn't it?
It did. Two stand out. One is the involutivity of characteristics. It's a fundamental result that tells us about the geometric structure of those systems of differential equations, especially those directions where solutions might be singular. And the second one, it's about the local structure of those systems at generic points. They show that by transforming those systems, you can often simplify them into well-understood forms, like de Rham systems, or a mixture of de Rham, Dolbeau, and Hond-Lewis systems. It was a huge leap forward in understanding those complex systems.
Wow, that's a lot to unpack, but I think we've got a good sense of what microlocal analysis is all about. Now, Professor Kashiwara is also famous for solving one of those legendary math problems, Hilbert's 21st problem. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. Hilbert's 21st problem is one of those challenges that mathematicians have been grappling with for a long time. Back in 1900, David Hilbert presented this list of 23 problems that really shaped the direction of math in the 20th century. And the 21st problem, it asks about the existence of differential equations with prescribed monodromy.
Monodromy, that sounds complicated.
It's a bit technical, but essentially describes what happens to the solutions of an equation when you move them around singular points. Imagine you have a solution that starts at a point, and then you move it around a singular point. When you come back to the starting point, the solution might be different. Monodromy describes how it changed. So Hilbert was asking, can you always construct a differential equation that has specific singularities and a specific monodromy behavior around those singularities?
And this problem was a tough nut to crack, right?
Very tough. It remained unsolved for 80 years. But in 1980, Professor Kashiwara, using those powerful D modules he had developed, managed to solve it. He proved that for certain types of spaces, you can indeed find those equations. It was a major victory for his approach and a testament to the power of algebraic tools.
So this abstract framework of D modules led to a concrete solution to a classic problem in analysis. That's amazing. And beyond that, how far-reaching has Professor Kashiwara's work been?
His work in algebraic analysis in general has had a tremendous impact on math. D modules are now used all over the place, like in algebraic geometry, representation theory, and even topology.
I even read about applications in physics, right?
Yes, that's right. In fact, just last year, in 2023, researchers like Annalore Saddleberger used D modules to study those really difficult path integrals in quantum physics. Those integrals that calculate the probability of different outcomes in quantum events, like particle collisions. And it turns out that some of these integrals are solutions to certain differential equations, so D modules provide a really elegant way to study them.
So abstract algebra helping us understand the fundamental building blocks of the universe. That's incredible. And what about his work on representation theory?
That's another area where Professor Kashiwara made groundbreaking contributions. Representation theory is all about understanding symmetry. It's about representing mathematical objects as transformations. And Professor Kashiwara did a lot of work on Lie groups, which represent those continuous symmetries. But he was also a pioneer in the study of discrete symmetries through these things called quantum groups, which are really important in modern physics. And to understand the representations of those quantum groups, he introduced the concept of crystal bases.
Crystal bases, what are those?
Imagine you have a really complicated structure, like a quantum group, right? A crystal basis is a way to represent that structure using a much simpler object, like a network or a graph. It makes it much easier to work with and often reveals some hidden combinatorial structures that are really important.
So it's like a simplified model that captures the essential information.
Yes, exactly. And crystal bases have also found applications in physics, especially in statistical mechanics.
So Professor Kashiwara has made foundational contributions to algebraic analysis, solved a century-old problem, and influenced fields like physics and representation theory. It's clear why he's receiving the Abel Prize. It's a recognition of an incredibly influential career.
Without a doubt. The Abel Prize Committee specifically mentioned his contributions to D-modules, microlocal analysis, and representation theory over the past 5 decades. It's a culmination of his lifelong work and a well-deserved honor. And it's remarkable that even at 78, he's still an active researcher, pushing the boundaries of math.
That's truly inspiring. He's dedicated his life to understanding the beauty and power of math. So to wrap up, we've explored Professor Kashiwara's pivotal role in establishing algebraic analysis, his groundbreaking work on D-modules, his contributions to microlocal analysis, and his solution to Hilbert's 21st problem. What a journey it has been.
And it all comes back to that incredible fusion of algebra and analysis, this new mathematical toolbox that Professor Kashiwara helped create. It's a new lens through which we can view the world, and it has applications far beyond pure math. Remember that example from Scientific American about understanding fluid dynamics? That's just the tip of the iceberg.
Right, that idea of needing new mathematical tools to tackle those really difficult problems, that's a powerful image. And it's amazing to see how these abstract ideas can have such concrete applications, even in fields like physics. It shows us that knowledge is interconnected in ways we might not always realize.
Absolutely. It makes you wonder what other mysteries are out there waiting for that right mathematical framework to be discovered. Maybe there's a whole new way of thinking, perhaps an algebraic one, that will unlock the secrets of the universe. It's an exciting thought, and I encourage our listeners to keep exploring these ideas and see where they lead.
I think that's a perfect note to end on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of Masaki Kashiwara and algebraic analysis. We'll be back with more explorations into the wonders of math, so stay tuned.
It's been a pleasure.